Mental health and women's health minister Maria Caulfield joins us now. We're going to talk about those local election results in a minute, but one of the issues that may well have affected them is health, mental health, your bit of it most strongly. We were just talking to Lindy Kirk and Dr. Amir. I don't know if you heard the interview, but the nub of it was that she had to pay £15,000 for a hip operation because she was in agony and immobile and retire early from teaching because the waiting list for her operation was 18 months. We have figures that have been shared with us that show 1 in 5 people are getting themselves into debt in order to pay privately. I know that the stats are that waiting lists are coming down, but it's not fast enough. And the reality for people is utter misery. Is the NHS broken?
Well, no, the NHS isn't broken. When we do recognise that coming out of the pandemic, there were waiting times over 2 years at the first part of after the pandemic. We have now got those down to under a year. They are falling, as you said, month on month. The last 5 months, we've seen a fall in waiting lists each and every month. And that's because we are putting in extra resources. We're building new surgical hubs, for example, over 100 across England, which are able to take on more surgical cases and are not affected by beds that are sometimes lost affected by A&E admissions, for example. We've got 160 diagnostic hubs opening up across England. I've got one in my own patch, able to do CTs, MRIs, biopsies, those sorts of procedures. And they are helping us get those waiting lists down. And in fact, our waiting lists are significantly lower than in Labour-run Wales, where there's a 40% higher waiting time. So it's not ideal. People are waiting on average between 6 to 9 months. I think the average for a procedure is about 17 weeks. For an operation, it's slightly longer.
I have to say that's not the experience that Dr. Amir said is happening on the ground. It's for things like hip operations, which can mean people can't work, they become a burden in different ways on their families and on the state in some cases. That's not what he's seeing. You know, that's not what he's seeing.
I also work in clinical settings as well, and I am seeing a difference. You know, cancer waits, for example, we met our faster diagnostic standard last month for the first time in a long time, and that's because we're getting procedures done more quickly. So it is, starting to change on the ground, and that's because we are investing in surgical hubs across the country, in community diagnostic centres around England, and that is making a difference. That's not to say that there aren't problems. You can't shut down health service for 2 years for routine procedures, which these are, hip operations and so forth, and then not have a backlog to deal with. We have dealt with the backlog. Our waiting times are now coming down to under a year. We've got through the winter period, and we're still seeing month-on-month reductions for waiting lists. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but we are heading in the right direction.
Maria Caulfield, you obviously had very difficult election results over the weekend, losing the West Midlands mayoral election, a big loss of Conservative seats. The Prime Minister saying that on this basis you would lose your majority in the next general election. People are very worried about the cost of living crisis, NHS waiting times that we've just been talking about. And the government's decided today to ask you to come onto the television to defend your announcement this morning, which is across the newspapers, that the government is going to introduce a new law to ban the march of gender-neutral toilets in buildings. I wonder whether talking about gender-neutral toilets today kind of is in line with the scale of the challenge you face. Is that actually the thing which is going to persuade people to vote Conservative in the next general election?
Well, that's in addition to the work we're doing on the economy, the NHS. I just pointed out...
No, but your announcement today, on the Monday after the local elections, you've decided to major on Kemi Badenoch, the business secretary, saying you're going to ban gender-neutral toilets. I just wondered whether, I mean, you know, it could have been the NHS waiting times or the cost of living crisis or what you were doing about education. I mean, is gender-neutral toilets really the first priority for the Conservatives on the Monday after the local elections?
Well, we are doing work on the economy. If you see that in April, People got their cut in national insurance. It's about £900 a year to each working person. That's already making a difference. But this is an important issue for women. And, you know, when we've consulted on these changes, 80% of those responded to say they are very keen to see single-sex spaces introduced. In our work in the NHS, in the Constitution, which we published before the local elections, we have committed to keeping single-sex space for women in particular, and also making sure that if you request an intimate examination by someone of your own biological sex, that should be respected. They may not seem important to you, Ed, but to women, this is really important.
Of course, and I don't think Ed's saying it's not important. I think the nub of it is, look, there's been an absolute collapse of the Conservative votes. These elections show that, if nothing else. The Prime Minister has admitted that the Conservative Party may not win at the next election. He thinks it's going to be a hung parliament. What's the plan, Maria? What are your bosses telling you to turn this around? What do you want to do? What's the plan?
The plan is very clear. We're tackling the economy, and Rishi was very clear when he was elected as Prime Minister that to get tax cuts in place, we had to reduce inflation. You couldn't do that. He was,
and it hasn't worked. The votes collapsed. So with this new information, what is the plan? Stick with Rishi, go all the way, carry on, or is there something you can do, or are you all slightly resigned to it?
Well, I think what the Prime Minister is pointing out is the polls ahead of these local elections were saying Labour were 20 points ahead. They're clearly not. The experts who've looked at the figures are saying it's between 7 to 9 points. And if they were to form a government, they would need the Lib Dems and SNP to do that. But what we've seen from the results is that our voters are not switching to Labour. And in these local elections, in places where we did lose, and we had some great results, we won 19 out of the 33 police crime commissioners, our voters tended to stay at home rather than vote for Labour or Reform. And so actually, if we're delivering on their priorities and they start to feel the difference of getting a grip on illegal immigration, feeling the tax cuts in their pay packets at the end of the month, seeing those waiting lists improve, and you know we've had falling waiting lists for 5 months in a row now, that people will hopefully come out and vote for the Conservative Party, because we are dealing with those 3 big priorities that on the doorstep people are saying are important to them: the economy, the NHS, and tackling immigration. And they're not seeing that from Labour. That's why they're not drifting to Labour in the votes. Andy Street only lost by 0.8%. And so that's what the experts are saying, that as it stands, there isn't that 20-point lead for Labour as the polls originally predicted.
So returning to your announcement of today, which I take very seriously, about single-sex toilets being discouraged, and also last week from the NHS about single-sex wards. As I understand it, what you're saying in the NHS is that people should be allocated a ward based upon their biological sex. Is that right?
Yes, we fundamentally believe that biological sex matters, and it's important that if you are a woman going in for an intimate procedure, that you should feel confident and safe in that space.
I understand that. So my mum is 85. Let's say that she's admitted to hospital, to a ward, and at the same time, somebody who was born a woman, but has now had a full transition, full hormone therapy, person has a penis now, she would be on the same ward as my mum, even though she's transitioned from being a woman because she was born a woman. That's what you just said.
So we have been very clear, and we're consulting on this at the moment, that biological sex matters, and that female same-sex wards should be the default position.
I don't think you answered my question there about my mum. My mum has been admitted, and there is a born woman who has transitioned, had the full hormone therapy, has a penis, but she would now be on the same ward as my mum because she was born a woman, and it's a single-sex ward, right?
You probably haven't read the Constitution that we're consulting on, because we do make a specific provision for those from the trans community. Right. And so there is a provision in there that if you are a trans patient, that you will be offered a single room, so that we can, with difficult circumstances like that, where staff are having to make difficult decisions, that there is provision for that. So I would suggest
I just read the press release. I just read the press release today. You've got a whole press release about gender-neutral toilets and single-sex wards. You're saying that a trans person would go in, their own room, not on the ward. What's it all about?
Well, it's about, we're hearing from women, both for using NHS services, but also women who are using toilets in the public sector, whether that's at restaurants, whether that's at hotels or shops, that they don't feel comfortable in gender-neutral toilets. This isn't a trans issue. There are young girls there who are having problems with their periods, who want to go into a space and not have a teenage boy next door to them in the cubicle right next door, an older man. They want to have a female-only space so that if they are having problems, they can use a bathroom facility and feel that their dignity and privacy is respected. We don't want to turn this into a trans issue. This is a woman's issue, and women want sex spaces, and I think that should be respected.
So you don't want to turn it into a trans issue?
Well, no, you're turning it into a trans issue. I'm saying this is a woman's issue. Women want to be able to use their same-sex bathrooms so that when they're having personal, intimate things that they want done, whether it's in hospital or they want to use a bathroom, that they have the privacy and dignity to that. And 80% of the people who responded to our consultation on this strongly supported the work that we're doing in this space.
Maria, thank you very much indeed. Maria Caulfield, good to talk to you this morning.